Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 244 of the Nope Coach podcast, when results don't live up to expectations. I'm your host, Suzanne Culberg. I'm sure we've all had at least one experience of this, if not more. I think for me, as I say, I probably have this at least at least once a week, sometimes on a much smaller scale than others. But often there are times when we do something expecting a result, and the result that we get does not meet our expectations in any way, shape, or form. Now, I'm going to use a couple of big examples for this, but there can also be small examples. So, actually, I'm going to start with a small example. When my children were young, they were both quite finicky eaters. Thank goodness now they eat almost anything. But there was a whole stage, we were just talking about this yesterday, where my daughter Xanthi subsided on ham, cheese, tomato wraps, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. That's the only thing that she would eat. It was not not a fun time. And I remember trying different sorts of things. And there was one stage where I made this like mushroom risotto that she loved. She loved it. And I was like, great. So I made like a huge batch of it. Wouldn't touch it. One other time I made like this tuna mornay. It was my mum's recipe and she loved it. And I was like, great. Made a whole big batch of it. Wouldn't touch it. So, the expectation when I tried a little bit and that she liked it was I could make a bigger batch so we could like expand her repertoire of things that she would eat. The reason this topic is pertinent for me right now is in the last few days, I've had a couple of chats to, colleagues, fellow coaches, clients, as we're wrapping up 2023, like, what did you do this year? And one of them, she did a TED talk. And let's just pause for a moment. A TED talk, that's amazing. The amount of time and effort that goes into, pitching, being accepted, creating your outline, putting the talk together, the outfit, turning up on the day, and so on and so forth. But, when you do something like a TED talk that you put a lot of effort into, you have an expectation of result. And then we see people like, Brene Brown and whatever, their TED talk launched them. It has millions of views. There is an expectation when you do something, especially something that requires a lot of effort, that you'll get a result. And thus far, though, the powers of the internet, this can change on a dime. The result of that hasn't been many views or anything for this person. Someone else I knew wrote a book, like she wrote a memoir. And as someone who's also written a memoir, I know the emotions that go into that. For me, it felt like slitting my emotional wrists and bleeding emotions everywhere. It's a lot of effort, it's a lot of risk, it's a lot of vulnerability. So, she had this notion in her head that writing a book would be the thing that would launch her business success, that, would be opening all these doors. And then it didn't. And there can be other examples, like people who have finally started that podcast or finally published their website or, finally crafted their signature offer or, something that has taken them a lot of time, a lot of energy, a lot of effort, and then has had an expected result in their mind. When I finally do the thing, then I will be discovered, or my business will boom, or I'll be booked out with clients, or I'll feel confident, or I'll feel successful. And then it's like, that didn't happen for me. And when this moment happens, where your results don't meet your expectations, what do you do then? For many of us, we immediately move on to the next thing. Well, it wasn't the TED talk, it must be the book. It wasn't the book, it must be the website. It wasn't the website, I must be, and so on. It must be SEO. It wasn't SEO, it must be ads. It wasn't ads, it must be, and we're perpetually stuck in this cycle of moving on to the very next thing. And what I encourage you to do, if this is resonating for you, is to pause and look at, how do you measure success? So say the person who did the TED talk, Was their idea in their mind 1 million views on YouTube, or a booked out practice, or a bunch of invitations to other things? Like, what were you expecting? What was the actual expectation? And two things within that, what was the timeline? Like, you have something that goes on the internet could be discovered at any time and overnight go from 5, 10 views to 1,000 to 100,000 views. Like, that's the whole premise of going viral. It's not wasted. Sometimes we just put too much of a timeline on it. Like, I love the book You're a Badass by Jen Sincero. I didn't realize that that book cycled for about 2 years before it took off and got discovered. So if you this year did a TED Talk, published a book, created something that hasn't yet boomed in your eyes, it doesn't mean it's not going to. Perhaps you're like bamboo. I remember reading that, bamboo spends about 5 years going under the surface and not much is seen, and then shoots up in 90 days. So could it be that it hasn't happened yet? It doesn't mean it's not going to. And the second part of how do you measure success? Who did you become in the process? By the effort it required to craft that TED Talk and practice it. How good of a public speaker did you become? How confident are you in your message? How much did you hone down on this topic? If someone else said to you, hey, could you speak on this tomorrow? How prepared are you? If you've written a book, how much dedication and commitment and energy, and now you know how to write a book, would you then choose to write another? If your first book wasn't the bestseller, like, how many authors, when you look at them, they're known for one or two pieces of work, but their body of work includes dozens of books, but it's only the one or two that have become the bestsellers. So who did you become in the process? What skills do you have? How does it feel internally to have achieved that? Like, I imagine if I'd done a TED Talk, that feeling inside myself, like, I'm a TED speaker, like, that can't be taken away regardless of the result. For me, I am an author. I have published a book. I'm an author. Like, I own that. That's part of my identity now. And the other thing is, instead of instantly going to the next thing, going, okay, well, it wasn't the TED Talk, it's got to be the book. It wasn't the book, it's got to be the website. It wasn't the website, it's got to be a podcast. It wasn't this, it's got to be SEO. And continually being in this loop of the next thing is going to save me or launch me or fix me. Perhaps spending some time processing disappointment. I don't know where it gets drilled out of us that it's not okay to be disappointed. I'm not saying unpack and live there and woe is me, but if you did something, if you put a lot of effort in and you were expecting some sort of return, it's okay to be disappointed, to feel that, to have what I call a burrito day, like wrap yourself up in a blanket, put sad movies on the couch, like just feel that for a moment or an hour or a couple of hours. Like, for me, this year has been a lot of grief. A lot of things have happened that have, in the past, I would have pushed down or ignored or moved on to, but I've actually, by processing disappointment, experiencing the grief, allowing myself to touch that has allowed me to move on or move through it rather than having it stuck. And ways that I do that is I'll pick a really sad movie, like basically anything by Nicholas Sparks, though I'm not a big fan of The Notebook. I know a lot of people love that. It's just not my jam. But, picking a sad movie and allowing that time to, express the emotions, setting a timer. I call it like the 5-minute funeral, setting a timer for 5 minutes and just allowing myself to cry or stomp or yell or rage or like feel whatever it is that I'm feeling. And when the timer goes up and I've processed that emotions, then moving on with the day. I find that so much more beneficial than perpetually jumping into the next thing continuously. And the other thing, when results don't live up to expectations, well, actually, this is the last thing, so I'm looking at time that I want to leave you with. When we start doing something, like recently, I was approached by someone saying, would you like to do a TED Talk? And I was like, no, I'm the no coach. I can say no. I know the amount of effort it goes into preparing it, to turning up in person, to, gussying up. I'm not interested in that. But the person who is selling you the thing, like the person who is a book coach or the person who's a web developer or the person who is running that TED event, they are going to have a vested interest in you doing the thing. And they're going to lead with people and examples. Like Brene Brown did her TED talk, it has millions of views. Jen Sincero has a book and now she's an international bestseller. Like they're going to give you examples of people who are successful, which makes sense because they're wanting to sell their thing or have you invest in their thing. And I really encourage you to ask or have a look or do some research. What are the typical results? So you're not looking at the 1% or the 0.01% and then comparing your result to theirs. Like, yes, Brene Brown became famous for her TED Talk, but how many other thousands of people have done TED Talks? If you go to TEDx website and scroll through, some of them have millions of views. Some of them have a couple hundred and 1,000. What are you doing the TED Talk for? Are you doing it to launch a career? Are you doing that because you want to own that you're a TED speaker? If you're writing a book, what are you writing the book for? Do you want to be a bestseller? Do you want to make the New York Times list? Do you want to be known? For me, I wrote the book because I knew I've always wanted to be an author. I'm an avid reader. I wanted to be an author. The second book that it's planning in the back of my mind, it still hasn't come to writing stage yet. I have different wants for that. So, what is your result that you're looking for in this thing that you're doing? Do you want to be the 1% or 0.01%? Or do you want to, build your confidence or say, I'm an author or I'm a TED speaker? And if that's the case, let that be enough. Don't compare your result to the people who make the results not typical list because, the person who's selling the thing, there's always going to be a person selling the next thing, saying, "Oh, well, you need SEO, or you need, meta descriptions, or you need this, or you need that," because that's their business. That's the thing that they sell. But does it feel fully aligned and in integrity and what you desiring to do, or are you avoiding processing your emotions by jumping in the camp of doing the next thing to try and get a result as a way of avoiding your feelings? Because whew, that's a whole thing. That's like my program Why Wait, one of our modules is about emotions, feeling our emotions, processing our emotions, because so often we don't. We numb out, we avoid, we distract, we get busy, like working, overworking, or overeating, or over drinking, or over scrolling as a way to avoid feeling how we feel. And it's not pleasant to feel things like disappointment or anger or rage or frustration. But when we can notice that that is what we're feeling and actually allow it to move through our body, it happens a lot faster than perpetually being on the hamster wheel of trying to do the next thing in a way of avoiding processing our emotions. Thanks for tuning in. I hope to catch you on the next one. Bye for now.